with Sai. How are you doing today, Sai?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well. We have been going back and forth for a while. I think both of us maybe we're similar in certain ways. I think it's back in August or something, and you came on my radar regarding precocious puberty, and I was thinking about that in terms of like we talk about delayed adolescence, like people are remaining childish, they're remaining childlike for longer and longer. Like, the bar mitzvah is supposed to define adulthood in Judaism, and that's like 14. And now we have age 18 as the age of adulthood, and then you even say, well, really, if you're in college, you're just a kid. You're kind of being taken care of in a college environment, in a college setting. And then we say beyond that, uh, that if maybe you're still finding yourself, or you're still on your parents' health insurance until age 26 or something. And so the idea is that we're just kind of pushing out adolescence farther and farther. But the reverse, and maybe it's not a contradiction, but the other way to look at the trend is to say people are biologically experiencing puberty at younger and younger ages. This has been a pretty consistent trend. And do you see those two, like the idea of prolonged adolescence or delayed adolescence versus precocious puberty? Do you see those as opposing phenomenon or a contradiction? One is wrong as one is right, or do you see them as somehow connected, and how so?
Well, so that is kind of what I ended my article on, right? Those two going in opposite directions is kind of an anomaly. What you usually see is the age of puberty correlates with kind of the age of majority, let's say, like at what age you're considered a fully grown adult. That tends to go together historically, but what we're seeing right now is kind of the opposite. They are going in two opposite directions, and I think there's something. I mean, the entire kind of point of my article was that this is a very multivariate problem, and that's why people don't really. The people that even know about it don't talk about it much because it's very hard to like as soon as you pull on one thread, two more come attached, and that just keeps happening, and it's like this huge tangle of factors. So I think that the fact that those two trends have come kind of unhinged points to probably some kind of environmental pollution, and as well as a lot of um, I would say unique problems that are not, we don't have any historical documentation of that kind of thing happening, and it kind of connects to one of the other exchanges that we had a while ago, which was like about the disembodiment and this like hemisphere imbalance. Um, do I mean we can kind of just directly jump into that, but the age of puberty thing I wrote about because it's again it's one of those things that a lot of people know about on the face of it, but it never gets actually discussed or addressed.
Well, I certainly wasn't really aware of it. I think there's like an empirical biological reality there that I wasn't, in health class in high school, nobody told me, oh, you guys are all experiencing puberty a lot earlier than your parents and your grandparents. And, um, that seems like a basic scientific fact that kids should know who are
Well,
experiencing that.
yeah. So I don't think it's taught in like health classes or something, or not even, it's not discussed in science classes, but I had observed it as even as a kid, because I don't know if this happens with boys, but with girls, you have conversations with your mom, your grandma, and immediately it's like, when when did your period start? And um, if you go back generations, it's older and older, and you just kind of observe that. And I remember thinking about it and wondering why that is happening, even as a kid. So I think that a lot of people know it as a phenomenon that's just happening, but it doesn't really get discussed again. Like even in health classes, I don't think it gets discussed.
Well, women are just, in general, far more attentive necessarily to the human body and to puberty and to sexuality from a there are things about the male anatomy I don't need to be like crude or something like that, but there are aspects of circumcision in America that for men are just not really thought about or talked about. Um, Whereas I think women are much more sensitive and self-conscious. I think that has to do with women being um, not in a negative way. I'm kind of thinking or writing about neuroticism as a advantageous trait. I think like it is. If people think of it as a universally bad, like if you're neurotic, that's just bad. But I think there are a number of ways in which neuroticism is it's a survival strategy for people whose livelihood or whose life depends on satisfying other people and making sure that they're operating within a social hierarchy conducively, cooperatively. And so the observation that women tend to be more cooperative, they tend to be more socially intelligent, emotionally intelligent, empathetic. I think that neuroticism plays a part in that. Not that the two are one to one, but
Right. Well, here's another problem, right? Age of puberty correlates with one of the things that could be described as neuroticism, right? It's uh, so one of the trends that you see is fatherlessness correlates with a lower age of puberty for girls specifically. And what they found is that the more unstable your home environment is, the earlier your puberty. And it's so precise that they can like predict how much it will push your puberty down in like almost down to like a couple of weeks or something. And so if you have an unstable environment, that can cause your age of puberty to go down. And so you have to wonder why, because I mean, those two things go kind of tangled together, right? Like it's not just one thing causing the other. Um, it's difficult to say which one started first, but um, like unstable environment causes early puberty, and early puberty causes hormonal changes and hormonal imbalances, and the imbalances cause you to be more neurotic and more sensitive to unstable environments. So it's you know um, I would say that neuroticism by itself can be an advantageous trait, but again, if it becomes if it comes unhinged from reality, that like you are getting nervous and um not nervous, the I guess the right term would be uh you are being affected by smaller and smaller changes in your environment, so you're getting like oversensitive to everything. That kind of neuroticism is definitely not advantageous, I would say, because it turns into a loop.
I mean, it's kind of an interesting metaphor you're using here, which is that if I have a microphone and this microphone is extremely powerful and it picks up all the little sounds of every crinkle of and even the blinking of my eyes, and so everything is picked up by the microphone. Every sniffle, every wheeze, every sound that doesn't make for a very good listening experience. Actually, the best listening experience is where you're able to filter out certain sounds. And I think as a neurotic person, I am mesophonic or mesophobic, whatever. No, it is mesophonic. I always mess it up. I hate noise because I'm sensitive to noise and I'm unable to filter it out. Now I've noticed that when I'm under a high level of stress, noise bothers me more. And when I'm relaxed, noise bothers me less. So definitely, I mean, neuroticism is a spectrum. It is a strategy of perceiving reality and reacting to reality. It's an emotional strategy. And it has certain advantages and disadvantages. My disclaimer there is not to say to be a misogynist when I say women are more neurotic. Oh, that means they're inferior and worse off. But simply to say that I think that those personality traits allow women to be more sensitive to intergenerational biological changes on an intuitive level in a way that men are not. I mean, fathers, I don't know. People with intact families, it's a different experience, but I don't know what kind of fathers are what kind of things they're talking about with their sons and the way that they talk about it. But yeah, I mean, the broader point is that this is not just a relationship between a mother and a daughter. This is the relationship between our entire society with itself, going in this direction, whether because of environmental pollution or, perhaps there are other factors. Perhaps there's a general stress factor. One of the things I like to point out that people are very keen to talk about religiousness, or excuse me, I've got it backwards. People are keen to talk about the internet and to talk about phones. That cell phones are the bane of our existence. Social media is causing all the suicide and depression. And I have a different perspective. My perspective is that people seek out social media, the internet, phones, because they don't have much else, because people's lives are fairly ambiguous and they're looking for something to anchor their attention and to find meaning. And because that's not readily apparent from our society, because no one is giving you the answers, there's no authority structure telling you right or wrong, you have to go to social media, you have to go on your phone, you have to go on the internet to find that. So that's what people are seeking. People are meaning-seeking machines, and that's where the meaning is, because we've deprived our neighborhoods and communities of meaning. That, we don't have communities where everybody goes to church. That doesn't exist. We would call that a cult. Or maybe rightly so. Maybe that is by definition a cult, but that was the default state of civilization for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. Everybody followed this, at least geographically speaking. If you lived in a particular area, everyone participated in the same rituals. And there is a deep necessity, psychological dependency that we as communal creatures in a society, we require that. And so the fact that that's been taken away in a very short span of time, very recently, I think is a significant stressor. And I think that's what drives people toward the internet and cell phones and social media. I think those things are fulfilling a need that's not being met elsewhere. And I think if it was being met elsewhere, it would be a totally different interaction. It would be, I mean, if you lived in a neighborhood where everyone in the neighborhood is the same exact religion, goes to the same exact church, that's a completely different reality. And the way that you would even interact with a technology like social media would be entirely different, because what's relevant to you and what's important to you would change. Because people who are connected and plugged in with their community in that way, some kind of distant, far off, event, what's happening in Washington, D.C., what's happening on the other side of the world, loses relevance. As we become more disconnected from local geographies, what's happening in Palestine means a lot more than, if you're intimately on at least a weekly basis, like physically present with the people you live around. And I'm just speaking from experience here of saying, I don't know who my neighbors are. I haven't known who my neighbors are for a very long, you maybe know 1% of the people, because there's you can walk for an hour around the neighborhood. And you maybe know 1% of those people from my experience. Now, maybe other people, they've got a different experience. They live in a rural area, they live in the South or something like that, where there is more of that. But there are these small degrees. Even that stereotype of the South, the religious Christian South. I mean, there's a lot of goths and emos and all sorts. I mean, transgender people. The idea that we have sometimes, I think of, especially if you're from an urban area, you kind of can maybe either demonize or idolize the South and say like, oh yeah, they still got traditional America down there, and it's like, yeah, they're like 10% toward that direction, but in the overall scale, that they've shifted dramatically from where it was 50 years ago or something like that. So that's one of the big kind of general factors that I would take into account when you're talking about intergenerational increases in stress. I think women are very sensitive to this. I think maybe even more than men. Is that men tend to have this kind of grilling attitude. And what I mean is that a lot of men, they kind of see the moral law or the church or the social structure as just kind of a given and not something that needs to be worried about, not something you're concerned about. And what really matters is, like, you go to job, you earn a paycheck, you'd like to buy a nicer car, you'd like to buy a boat, you'd like to, you have the hobby, you like painting Warhammer 40K models, you like playing chess, you like playing video games, whatever. Men have these practical hobbies where they're basically simulating warfare in one way or another. And women, on the other hand, they see that as nerdy, they see that as geeky, they see, oh, you're reading some history book, and they're not super interested in that. As a stereotype in general, I'm not saying every individual.
Um, so I'm not completely sure about this, but I think you still might be pointing just to the symptoms here of like this meaninglessness and people retreating into their hobbies and their like phones. And I mean, books are also part of it, I think. I definitely feel myself getting to like reading addictions. Um, but I think that's also one of the symptoms. It's uh, because I've been kind of chasing this tail for quite a while, and every time I feel like I've reached some kind of causal factor, there are like other underlying things that come about that come out from it. And so when you were talking about people not having that community around them to kind of give them meaning, I think that people have fundamentally, like most people, have fundamentally lost the sense of meaning. Like um, they've lost the machinery in their brain that allows them to perceive meaning. And it is definitely a need that people have. So, you do see people like all of the things that you're pointing out are true. And maybe maybe men are a little less perturbed by it, maybe women are a little more stressed by it, but I don't think that's a fundamental difference between men and women, like because uh, women have their own sort of occupations that they retreat into. It's not seen as nerdy because their hobbies are not nerdy, but they are equally as kind of hypnotized into different things. But there's this, so the hemisphere lopsidedness, I guess, that I didn't really explain myself that day. We had like an exchange about it, but basically this is coming from the um it, so it's a book called The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. And his hypothesis is that the two hemispheres usually kind of go back and forth, and you see like this civilizational um, moving from one to the other of like, um, I mean, he goes over quite a wide range of art and literature and ideas and philosophy and all sorts of things. It's a very dense read, but basically the point he's trying to make is that going back and forth has kind of stopped in one place, and now we're kind of stuck in a civilization And I would say that whatever civilization it is, it's kind of global, right? Because I'm coming from India and I see the same things happening back in India. So it's not just like a Western thing, but it's stopped in its left hemisphere kind of turning, and that's where you see this kind of disembodiment. And um, when I say that people don't even perceive meaning, that's what I mean. It's like because most of the um, functions of the right hemisphere include kind of being grounded and being embodied, and um, it's very outward looking, the right hemisphere. And so you kind of once you see that pattern, it's very hard to unsee it, I guess. So I keep kind of coming back to that hypothesis. I think that is true.
The embodiment of our the embodiment of meaning, or whether we're not we're perceiving meaning. um I mean, that to me is so. I mean, I get. Well, I agree with you that there's like left right hemisphere differences. I don't know that the way that I see left right hemisphere differences are more having to do with um, maybe hyper categorization, the necessity for things to be black and white, the necessity for things to be very clear cut, the necessity for things to be unambiguous, the necessity to take things to their logical conclusion rather than tolerating paradox or, to me, it's sort of this rigorous desire to systematize versus a more nominalistic, like phenomenological, like, okay, well, things are just happening and we're going to just kind of like take it one step at a time versus like, no, I have to think 10 years into the future. I have to have the perfect plan. I have to have everything figured out. So that's kind of how I see the divide there, but I don't see that as being a difference of meaning. You could say maybe there's a difference of embodiedness, because the person who's taking things procedurally or in a reactionary way is more embodied in their environment. The person who's thinking into the future or taking things to their logical conclusion is more disembodied. So maybe I can agree with that part, but I don't know that one side. I actually would say that the more abstract thinker has a greater need for meaning, in the sense that somebody who's totally embodied in the Garden of Eden, in the jungle, and they're just smelling the smells and seeing the sights and hearing the sounds, and they're kind of in a flow state and they're just enjoying the moment, they don't really need to justify the meaning. It's just like, this is beautiful, this is wonderful, this is life, and I'm just experiencing things moment to moment. And they're not like self-reflectively, introspectively searching for meaning. It's not this burning quest for like, okay, yes, there's this material world, but what's the purpose behind it all? What is the meaning? What is the telos? And so I would say that the right brain, and maybe I'm getting the right and left, but the systematizing, future-oriented person has a greater lust for meaning in an abstract sense, whereas the person who's just ephemeral and phenomenological and intuitive, taking life as it is, the meaning is just, it is what it is. We're just going with the flow, dude. We're just,
This is kind of like a misunderstanding of what the two hemispheres do, right? So all of the ways that you characterize right hemisphere, uh, they are true, but apart from all of that, what the right hemisphere is also good at is taking discrete ideas and kind of combining them into a coherent whole. And so the left hemisphere can abstract things, and it can kind of build a logical system that is internally consistent, but it can't actually anchor it to the real world. It like what ends up happening is that it takes something that was meaningful, that was perceived by the right hemisphere, as because perception is mostly done by the right hemisphere. And so what the left hemisphere does is it takes all of those things, it deconstructs them, abstracts them into something, some kind of system, and then it kind of stops there. It can't um, kind of bring it back to the world, which is the job that's done by the right hemisphere again. And that is the part that we're missing, I think. That is the part that we're all kind of becoming very deficient in, is taking discrete ideas and um, sort of stitching them together and like anchoring them into something real.
Mm, I don't know that process of taking ideas and corresponding them to reality. Um, yeah, I don't maybe that kind of description in itself doesn't ring true for me. I feel that there's an engineer personality, somebody who's very concerned with practical reality, the day to day, the real world, so to speak, where there's this obvious or intuitive, well, of course I got a STEM job because, why would you get a job? Why would you get an English major? That there's no practical skills in that. Like, I don't understand, like, it just doesn't make sense to them. It doesn't, there are people for whom uh, those pursuits or asking the question why or the meaning of life, they're just kind of like, well, yeah, of course, like, I want to have good stuff, and here's how I achieve that, and that's the focus of life. And I have a
Well,
tripartite view. I don't
the
have
problem
a
is that
dualistic view of
no, no,
this.
no. Here's the thing. We've kind of built a complex enough social system and economic system and all sorts of, because we're embedded in all sorts of artificial systems, right? Artificial machines, basically. And what it ends up doing is that every kind of opportunity that we otherwise would have to be brought back to reality is just another opportunity to go deeper into the system. That's what you're kind of pointing to. It's like, when I say that being practical, I don't mean being practical within the system that we've created. There's no, like, you can live your entire life without any contact with the real world now. And I mean, if that is what you want, then I guess you should be allowed to do that. But what ends up happening is that that system can't last forever, right? You need people to kind of revitalize it. And so what I see happening is that it's just, it's a zombified system. It's kind of dead from the inside, and it's slowly um, rusting and falling apart. But most of the people that can still survive within it don't actually see it crumbling.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't agree with the characterization that we live in a system that's more superstitious or disconnected from reality than any previous society. I think historical societies were incredibly delusional, superstitious, and disconnected from reality. I think that the scientific method is a good way for getting connected to reality. I'm a Platonist. I believe that empiricism works, and I don't care that the vast majority of people have inaccurate whatever sort of models about this or that. I don't see it as a downward trend. I don't think the average person on the street is any less disconnected from reality than they were 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, or something like that. I think most people have I mean, in general, most people have no clue what's going on, period. Um, and to the extent that we know anything, we know very little in general. Even the people who are on the cutting edge of any given field. Let's say you're a physicist and you're working on the edge of quantum physics. You're working on the latest research. Okay, well, you're a specialist in that particular field. But what do you know about sociology? What do you know about history? I mean, human knowledge is so vast. And so, maybe this sounds nihilistic or something, or relativistic, but I find it very hard to reduce this idea of human connectedness to reality to a simple quality, and then we say, and it's going down. It's like, I don't think we know enough about reality to even make that kind of statement. Maybe I'm being very Socratic here.
You're thinking of the complex, like, we've developed a pretty complex model and pretty complex understanding of how reality works. But that's not what I mean. I mean, if you're sitting out in the wild, That is what I mean. It's like when I say reality, I mean your actual like real surroundings, and people have lost touch with it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, I guess I don't agree. I think that it's not that we've lost touch with reality. It's that we're in a transition where we're getting in touch with a new reality. And that's where the confusion comes from. It's not that we have less information or less meaning or we're less in touch. It's that we're being pulled in different directions. It's that there are contradictions. It's that when you're in a forest and you're just being in the forest, there's no contradiction. You are at home in the forest. You are living the life that your ancestors lived. You are in harmony with nature, and so there's no dissonance, there's no contradiction, there's no inner conflict. And confusion arises not because you've lost touch with reality or you're distant from reality, but because you've become.
You're kind of trying to take in a wider set of